Stop the looming CASH-tastrophe, and Australia doesn't like tasting its own medicine. Coming up on today's Citizens Report. Welcome to the Citizens Report for the 27th of February 2025. I'm Elisa Barwick. Joining me today is Citizens Party Research Director Robert Barwick. Welcome, Robbie.
Thanks, Elisa.
And on today's show, we're going to be discussing the July crunch point for cash delivery.
We're hurtling towards a cliff.
Absolutely, and we'll see what the Reserve Bank has to say about that and contrast that with our solutions. And then we're going to come back and talk about the Chinese flotilla that's been sailing around Australia and what the real issues are afoot there. So stay tuned for that one. Now, don't forget to help us get the word out and share this show as widely as possible. So you can do that in a number of ways. Of course, make sure you're yourself subscribed and ring the notification bell. We're putting out a lot of extra content at the moment, particularly given that there's an election on. And to help share it around, you can...
Hang on, coming. It feels like it's on, but...
It's pretty much on.
We're not breaking news here yet.
No, we're not about to.
We don't know anything.
Still can't tell you for sure, so stay tuned. But yeah, definitely make a comment below, hit the like button and share the show on social media to help get that around.
And make comments. As well, you've said make comments, but the comments are like feedback, and we do try and engage with them.
Yes.
But also, there's a donate button there as well, Elisa. And I just want to say that's actually becoming increasingly important. And at this point, I'll give a plug to the interview that's up on YouTube immediately before this video.
Citizens
Insight interview that I did on Monday with Associate Professor Andy Schmulo, who's the Citizens Party's Senate candidate for New South Wales. Now, if you're watching this show now, because you're a regular viewer, and you haven't seen that yet, it's one of the reasons maybe we try our best to keep these shows as short as we can, try not to get to an hour. But anyway, you've got to watch it. Seriously, you must watch it because Andy demonstrates in Technicolor how he would be a senator. And this guy, if he got in, he would be a fighter, a champion for the people of Australia against this rigged system. And he knows how to do it. He knows where it's corrupt, and he will be fearless in going after that. And exactly the sort of person we need. And it really puts a fine point on we need funds. When you run a camp, now the Citizens Party, we have a way of raising funds to run our operation, which involves, we're running campaigns all the time, but this is now election campaign. And it's just an incredibly expensive proposal. So we get thousands of views, like say we get regularly 5,000 views of this show. And so we have many thousands of people who are regular viewers of the show. If you think about an amount of money that you can do regularly that won't upset your budget that you can handle, but be prepared to do it regularly for our election campaign, start using that donate button below and helping us out that way. Because if 1,000 people did $20, it's $20,000, and we are not funded by corporations, trade unions, government. The government doesn't pay us any money like they pay the two major parties money. We are entirely independently funded. We don't have Clive Palmer behind us. Clive Palmer's just gone around shopping for political parties and he finally found one. He didn't come to us.
The trumpets.
Didn't come to the Citizens Party because we're not for sale. And Andy exemplifies the fight that we will take up because we're going to go after the vested interests so that we can bring back accountability to the system. That's why we don't have it. But we need your support, all right? So click on that donate button, figure out how much you can donate, and think about in terms of doing it regularly for this election campaign. It'll be incredibly valuable.
Absolutely, and thank you in advance and for people who've helped in the past. Now, Robbie, there's a couple of updates as well that you wanted to mention in regard to both Dan Duggan and David McBride.
Yes, so these are two cases that we've championed on the show. So David McBride first, his appeal... so it's the 27th of February. His appeal is on the 3rd of March, which, help me out, I think it's Monday. His appeal will be heard in Canberra. I went down to an event last Wednesday to Cheltenham at it's called the Kingston and District Community Network, and I gave a presentation on David. It's in the text is in our
Australian Alert
Service this week. Just telling the full story to prove to people why this guy should not be in jail, right? Breaking news though, because this week has been Senate estimates, Senator David Shoebridge from the Greens, who has also championed David McBride, he asked the Attorney General's Department how much money they spent prosecuting this man who blew the whistle on war crimes in Australia, and the total amount was
$676,820.
$820. $2 million. Now, David, just to give you a sense of proportion, the money that David has raised through crowdfunding for his appeal is $140,000. The money that he raised the first time around for his initial court case that was heard in November 2023 was about $250,000. And he's up against a government apparatus that's prepared to spend that amount of money crushing people. And these are the same people in government, just so infuriated me when I saw that figure. These are the people who will just, when it comes to like the robo-debt thing, right? They will justify squeezing and punishing the small people for the smallest things. Yet when it comes to crushing people who've exposed their wrongdoing, they'll spend any amount of money, right? And it's really terrible. Now, what I'm hoping, I can't preview the appeal, Elisa. We've helped to get John Shipton there, Julian Assange's father, who is a big supporter of David, and David, of course, was a big supporter of Julian Assange. So there'll be events in Canberra that actually I might get the producer to link to under the show. If you're in the Canberra region, there is an event on Sunday night. That's all I can tell you right now. Rain Sinclair, if you're watching this, I apologise, I don't know the details. We'll put a link below to the Canberra event on Sunday night that you can attend to if you want for the McBride supporters. But one thing I want to remind people is the day David McBride was sentenced to 5 years and 7 months, which was way beyond anything that he was prepared to go to jail, but for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months or whatever. 5 years, 7 months. They did this to crush this guy. That evening, Richard Marles, the Defence Minister, released documents that Senator Malcolm Roberts had asked for through the Senate processes. And that was a report that he'd been sitting on from 2 weeks before McBride's trial, where the former Inspector General of Intelligence, Vivian Tom, had led a panel to look at what was called the Brereton Report, which was a report into the war crimes that David's leak had exposed. And the big beef David had all along was it was soldiers who were getting punished, not their commanders. And his argument was they were being scapegoated. And the Brereton Report had confirmed the war crimes, but explicitly said the commanders should not be held accountable. Nothing should be done to them. And this is one of the things that made David really furious. And it was what his initial motivation was. He knew that would happen. Vivian Tom's report said to Richard Marles, they recommended the commanders be held accountable. In other words, it confirmed that David McBride was right. Richard Marles sat on that. And in the cover letter that she wrote to him, to Richard Marles, she said, there's nothing in this report that needs to be kept classified. It can be made public. Instead, he sat on it, so it couldn't influence the trial in November 2023, and it couldn't influence the sentencing hearing in, I think, May or June 2024 that sentenced him to such a big, and it was released that evening. This is the government rigging this process against this guy. So it's absolutely infuriating, and we're behind David all the way. But yeah, we'll click on the link. We'll put the link below. You can look at that. The other thing, just quickly, an update on Dan Duggan, which is absolutely, it's despicable and it's heartbreaking. So regular viewers will know Dan Duggan is the former US Navy Top Gun pilot who moved to Australia because he married an Australian girl in 2000. He became an Australian citizen in 2012. He trained some Chinese pilots in South Africa at a time when nobody was talking about war with China. 2 years later, the President of China was addressing our Parliament as a guest of honour, for crying out loud. He did not break any Australian law, but he got arrested in 2022 and he's been in jail ever since. So now 2 years and 4 or 5 months or something, he's been in jail in Australia for not breaking any Australian law. He's fighting his extradition. The Attorney General approved his extradition on Christmas Eve when nobody could do anything about it. And that opened a window where he could have been extradited from anywhere from the 1st of January to the 17th of February. But in January, the family succeeded in getting an appeal up, right? Now that was really crucial. And that appeal that's now in process, that suspends the timing for the extradition. So he doesn't, while the appeal's underway, the family knows he will not be transported to the United States. However, 2 weeks ago, out of the blue, prison guards came into Dan Duggan's cell, and said, pack up, you're going to Long Bay, you're flying out today. And that set off 6 hours of pure terror that family went through, from everywhere from Dan to his wife Safrine and the kids, right? A process where they thought they had security while the appeal was underway. Suddenly, with no ability to properly communicate except to each other, they're being told, no, this is happening, right? And it was 6 hours of torture that they went through. And then after 6 hours, the prison authorities said, oh, sorry, there was a mistake. That's what we put this family through. We've already put them through hell for 2 years. He's got 3 kids that have a birthday this week, and it's the 3rd time they've had. So they just happen to have all been born in the same week. These like different years, of course. There's 2 twins and a younger girl. Their birthday was this week. The 3rd time they've had their birthdays without their father around. For a guy who hasn't broken any Australian laws, right? And you know this is absolutely atrocious. So if that sort of thing infuriates you, maintain your rage, because this is the sort of stuff we've got to fight. And it's going to relate to what we talk about in the second half of this show about the Chinese warships, because it's got to stop falling for the damn propaganda.
Yes, we do. Now, on our first topic, there's more propaganda to dispel. Stop the looming cash-tastrophe. Now, Michelle Bullock was interviewed on the 21st of February in the House Economics Committee, and we'll play a clip from that shortly. But she pointed to something we and others have been pointing to for some time now, which is a double crunch point coming in July. So at the end of June, the first thing that will happen is the Armaguard deal to bail out Armaguard and keep it operating will expire. And of course, nothing's been solved on that front. And then
Armaguard's a virtual monopoly now in cash distribution in Australia.
Yeah, so getting the cash from point A to point B, that's the number one issue. Number two is the Westpac contract for cash distribution, because it takes charge of the money between point A and point B. It basically owns that money.
It's the custodian.
So its contract to do that is expiring in July, and it doesn't want to do it anymore.
And no one else wants to do it.
Exactly. So they've got two crunch points that are hitting end of June and July, so around about the same time. And if they are not solved, Michelle Bullock said, the head of the RBA, we will be in big trouble.
Now this is, think about how this plays out, Elisa, because the first thing the viewer should be thinking about, based on what we've just said, is why haven't they heard this on the news? It was said in the House Economics Committee on Friday by the head of the Reserve Bank. People aren't taking seriously enough what this means if cash distribution grinds to a halt in Australia in the middle of the year.
All of a sudden.
What you have is there's 26% of Australians who are digitally excluded. They're not digitally included. There's a thing called the Digital Inclusion Index that measures what percentage of Australians are, comfortable and, regularly on online platforms, etc., being able to use digital technology. 26%, more than a quarter aren't, right? And that includes, the elderly, the disabled, the many, a large proportion of Indigenous Australians and other groups, and of course, there's a greater weighting of that in regional areas, right, where the communications technology is less reliable. Those are the 26%. They need cash. They can't function without cash. Right, so that's more than a quarter of the country, and then for the rest of the country, we're all digitally included. But I've got cash in my wallet. You've got cash in your wallet. Many people are happy using their cards, but they've got cash as a backup, or they like using cash in certain situations, etc. It's appropriate for certain situations, and of course, the backup pub is the most important bit, because in those events when systems go down, and they can go down in one business, they can go down in a whole city, right? You can have a natural disaster and a whole region is knocked out. It's the people with cash and the ability to access cash that can keep functioning, right? And so who knows if there's going to be a natural disaster in July this year, right? And everyone's turning around and going, "Where's an ATM I can get, or can I get it from the?" You wouldn't be able to even get it from the post office because armour guard trucks won't be moving because this is not being done. This is a cash-tastrophe that's looming for Australia, and we're the ones talking about it. We actually talked about this a few weeks ago on the show, and in a release we did when it was first being discussed, and we said, okay, here's the solution. You know, that's enough time to start. We said July is enough time to start a postal bank and solve all this. What shocked me about Michelle Bullock, and we'll play her clip. But what shocked me about it is there's been 2 or 3 weeks since we did that, and her testimony shows they've done nothing to actually solve this. They've done nothing. She's just hoping something will happen.
Yeah, no, she literally said when she was, and the questioning by Garth Hamilton, Liberal, was excellent because he raised the fact that, he said, what about the fact that people can't get cash already because of the closure of ATMs, the closure of bank branches? He said, this is literally the biggest feedback I get from my constituents.
Pittsworth, the towns of Pittsworth and Oakey used to have, near Toowoomba there, used to have 4 banks. The big 4 banks were in those towns. Now they're not there. They've got an ATM and they're hoping they don't lose that.
And so when she was asked about the solutions for this and the implications, she literally said, I think they have to find a solution by June. If they don't, then we're in trouble.
We should play her.
But yeah, who does she mean by they?
Well, that's right. Listen to Ms. Bullock for the next few minutes, and then draw your own conclusion.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of questions on cash distribution. So is the RBA confident that the banks and Armour Guard will be able to do a deal by June? I think we've got the emergency funding expiring at that time. And what are the options if a deal isn't agreed on by that time?
Yeah. I'm never confident in this cash space at the moment. I know the banks are working very hard on it, and I know that they are working with Armour Guard. We have a very specific role to play, and we're looking to see whether or not there's some things we can do to help, but ultimately we don't have a role in this retail cash distribution area. I think they have to find a solution by June. If they don't, then we're in trouble. So I think that necessity will mean that something will be done. I don't know what it is, but we've got to think that cash is going to be around probably for another 10 years, and we've got to find a way of moving to a new system that means that distribution of cash can be undertaken and viable. Now, there's a number of options that could get you there, but the bottom line is that cash distribution is someone is going to have to, if you don't want the consumers to pay, then someone has to pay, and it's going to be difficult to figure out how it is subsidised. How is it going to work? And we don't have a solution as yet.
Can I just go into thank you, and I agree there's probably only small elements that the RBA can actually play in that part, but what might some of those elements be?
So the main element we're looking at the moment is that we pay interest so banks take a cash out from us and they hold it in various storage places so they can get it to where they need to get it. We pay interest on parts of that. So they have to hold it in certain ways under certain conditions, and we will pay them interest. So that encourages them to have money out there. We're looking at whether or not we can expand that interest compensation to additional areas, which would encourage them further to hold cash out in the community so they can get it. So that's the main thing we're looking at the moment.
And just going on to the issue of what's been raised in the context of particularly regional bank closures is there is a cost to cash already. We don't see it. It's usually bank charges or somewhere it's carried. But what we're talking about is this increased cost. And it's that difference that we're trying to work out where that's carried. Do you think banks are doing enough on this? I honestly, one of the biggest feedbacks I have, particularly in small towns, Pittsworth and Oakey, where there's where none of the majors exist anymore. We used to have 4 major banks. They're all gone. We're left with an ATM, and we're worried if that's going to go. Are banks doing enough to keep that open? And you're talking about a transition period that could be quite some time yet.
Yeah. Look, I think the banks, my understanding at least, is that they have basically agreed to a moratorium at the moment. The challenge is that...
It's about the third one I've heard of.
Yes. I think the challenge is that the banks, on the one hand, are commercial institutions. They've got to work for their shareholders and so on, but we also expect them to meet some sort of community service obligations, and cash is one of those, I think. Branch access is another. The difficulty with moving to a much more digital payment system and banking system is that increasingly the person-to-person element of that is getting smaller and smaller. And there's a group of people who really want to use that, but they are just becoming a smaller and smaller and smaller group. And so there's a real tension between effectively servicing them at a much higher cost than you're servicing everyone else. So the bulk of your customers are basically cross-subsidising the group the much smaller group. So there is a very big challenge here, and the cash system is an example of it. But the digital side of things, I can't remember the last time I went into a bank. There's a large portion of the population that just have gone purely digital, but there's another portion, and they are often the more vulnerable people, lower income people, the regional people. They're the ones that are being squeezed by this, and it's the economics of all this fixed cost infrastructure increasingly supporting a smaller and smaller group of people. So it's very challenging.
So at the end of the clip she said, so I think they have to do something, but I don't know what it is. So she's literally...
It'll be done. Necessity means something will be done. They will do something, but I don't know what it is. Let me explain something. That person, Michelle Bullitt, is the most powerful banker in Australia. She runs Australia's only government bank. The RBA is owned by the Australian government, but it doesn't function as a national bank. It's a central bank that frankly, under this modern era, its only role under these governments has been as a backstop to the private banks. That's what it does. But she actually has the power to bark orders if she wants to, as does the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers. And instead of barking orders to say, you shall, she's saying, well, we hope something will be worked out, right? And they're just, the assumptions that were pouring out of her in that discussion were actually quite wild.
Yeah, I mean, like she was talking about how this has to be cross-subsidised from somewhere. Like, it was just ruled out that you would ever make the banks pay for it. There was an explicit assumption. You can't make the banks pay for it, even though it's their cost of doing business.
Well, so even though she said, will the banks, she has a line there, will the banks do it? When you understand what she's saying, she's knowing they're not going to, and she's not going to make them.
Yeah.
And the word is cross-subsidisation, because what the banks have been arguing for a number of years now, they whine about it. They go, only a few people are left using cash. The majority are not using cash. That means the majority of our customers are subsidising the minority who are using cash. Well, hang on. As Dr. Andy Schmulo said in the interview here on Monday, and you can look it up, it's about the 40-minute mark. When you hear banks saying that, what that means is they're admitting there's not enough competition in the banks, because the assumption is, other customers, they're putting the costs on one set of customers to subsidise another set of customers. No, they should be putting the costs on their shareholders, i.e. take it off your profits, banks. You get enough of them, $32 billion, right, between the big four. CBA announced $5 billion for a half-year profit. It's on track for $10 billion again, probably even more than that. But they don't assume that the shareholders will carry the cost, it comes off the profit. They're putting the profits on the customers. And And Andy Schmulow's point is, if the banks always pass the costs on to their customers, it means they don't have enough competition. Because if they had enough competition, they know they can't do that because the customers will take off and go somewhere else.
Yeah.
But they're assuming they can't. And so that's the bank's attitude. But Michelle Bullock is right there with her, with them, approving that attitude.
And trying to float ideas about how the Reserve Bank
They're going to pay them more.
can give money to the banks.
They've already got an arrangement of how much they pay in interest for the cash that's stored around. They said, oh, let's pay them more.
Yep. Now, I wanted to add this to the issue. It's going on in the background, and I've written about this in the Australian Alert Service this week. You can read the article. We'll put it up online. Because the RBA is also doing a consultation, a review of surcharges and surcharging, because while the banks say cash is so expensive, they say at the same time that the cheapest way for them to get your cash to you or get your money to you is digitally, right? That's the cheapest way for us to operate.
So they're admitting it doesn't cost them very much.
Yeah, and yet you are paying through the nose through these surcharges. They're passing on all their costs, which are so cheap apparently, to the businesses, and the local businesses are passing it on to you, to the person who's purchasing something.
And Elisa, they pass it on, the surcharge is a percentage.
Yes.
Now, if it costs, the processing cost for the banks is no different processing $1 to $1 million.
Oh yeah, exactly.
So they could have a fixed 10-cent surcharge, 20-cent surcharge, 50 cent, maybe $1.
Yeah.
Fixed. They could have it fixed. No, they put in a percentage.
Yeah.
So that the bigger the transaction, the more you pay in a surcharge. Yeah. And this flows into their coffers.
You really notice it when you make a big purchase, like paying for a flight or something like that. And the other thing to notice is that and this is in the RBA report on it, the issues paper, we can put the image on the screen, is that small business spends 3 times as much as the bigger merchants on surcharges, what they're paying to the banks, which they then have to recoup from you. And of course, small business in Australia is 98% of business, but this is because they don't have the bargaining power, they can't make the deals and arrangements that the big businesses and monopolies can make.
That's another example of the rigged system that Andy Schmulo rages against when he talks about, the Coles and Woolies of this world as opposed to the small businesses, etc.
Yeah, and there's some excellent submissions that were made, for instance, from the Independent Payments Forum Australia to this ongoing inquiry, where they've made very, very clear. Here you have the banks complaining about the cost of delivering cash when it's their fault because they have shut down the branches, they've shut down the ATMs, they have pushed people, forced people to go digital and left no alternative. And of course, many people say, including from the Choice submission, that they see cash as the alternative to surcharges so that they can avoid that extra impost. But Robbie, we're going to be putting out a media release to talk about how to solve this cliff that's coming up.
Okay, because there's a time limit, right, that defines what you have to do. Because we can't stuff around here. July is looming. June, July is looming. So the first thing you do is you actually start barking orders at the banks. You don't accept their crap. Michelle Bullock, Jim Chalmers say to the banks, you're going to do this. Cut the crap. You're going to do this and you're going to wear the costs. So we know one bank's cost is, the biggest bank in Australia's cost is $400 million for moving cash around. That's $400 million after they've paid it, they still have a $10 billion profit. So boo freaking who, right? Pay it, suck it up, Matt Coman, crybaby Coman. The other banks, probably only Westpac matches that, right? Because it has this extra role in the cash, but it gets paid for its extra role in the cash distribution business. And the other banks would be smaller. So maybe it's $1 billion overall out of the $32 billion that they earn in profits, right? And remember, that profit that the big four banks, that makes them among the most highly profitable banks in the world, right? So that's the first thing. Just say to them, cut the crap. This thing's looming by July. You are going to suck it up and you're going to start paying cash distribution costs fairly, right? That immediate problem is solved. The bigger problem is you've got these. By the way, this is why Ben Chifley tried to nationalise the banks. He wasn't ideological in nationalising the banks. The only reason he thought he had to nationalise the banks in 1949 is because he'd come up with these reforms and the banks had an agenda to get rid of his reforms slice by slice through court action. And they lost the first court action, and Chifley realised they're going to keep doing this until it's all gone. So he just pulled the rug out from under all, tried to nationalise them, and of course that wasn't allowed. But that's the nature of the banks, right? So instead of nationalisation, what do? Well, this is where the public bank comes in. If the banks truly don't want to serve their customers, good, get out of the way. We'll set up a public bank. It'll have a retail arm in post offices where everybody in Australia who hates the big four banks and doesn't have a local option that they like, they can go and bank at the public bank, right? And the bank, the post office bank, will do all banking services. No restrictions on cash deposit and withdrawals as there are now through Bank at Post, right? This is not banking with the bank, at the bank, like Bank at Post where you bank with the existing bank. This is banking with the post office because that is now the bank. So that then defines a network of over 4,000 post offices around Australia, which will become the repositories of cash. Mm-hmm. And then you've got this, suddenly you've got an insight into how to solve the actual distribution costs, because Australia Post is a distribution company, right? And there's all sorts of technology, Elisa, that you can actually put in these postal trucks to safely carry cash and cut out, if Armaguard doesn't want to do it, if Lindsay Fox and Armaguard doesn't want to do it anymore, let Australia Post do it. Now we know we have these fantastic figures from the 1999 government inquiry into this, where the West Australian people made the point that until the mid-90s, Australia Post carried cash in regional WA, and they charged the banks for the cash they carried around, which was a lot more than today, right? And the average price per bank branch in WA to cover the cost of that was $20 a week. As soon as Australia Post stopped doing that and was taken over by these Armaguard type companies, cash and transit companies, the price per bank went to $600 a week. That shows you how efficient Australia Post is capable of doing this, right? So the technology includes things like they've got these special ways to pack cash where you've got these dies that are packed in among the cash, and if they are removed from the proximity where they're programmed to be unauthorised, then they explode and all the cash in that package is completely ruined. And so the organised crime element will soon, if they think they'll take advantage of this, they'll soon learn it's a waste of time trying to rob cash from Australia Post, vehicles and stuff like that. So, and it can be done very, very efficiently. That's what you do with that's how you solve this problem going forward for everybody. And if the private banks don't want to actually serve people, they will make the postal bank incredibly successful because so many people will jump ship into the public postal bank.
Yes, no, so there's a way to do it and it's pretty straightforward. So we don't need to have a cash-tastrophe.
No.
Ms. Bullock. Now, I want to, before we move on, make a very quick plug again for you to watch the interview with Andy Schmulo by playing just a very, very quick couple of minute excerpt from his introduction. He's explaining here why he's running for the Senate.
What is it about politics and that made you want to be a senator?
It's not ambition.
No.
I've got a good job. I have a good salary. I have a pretty cushy job. I work when I want to. I've got a great new research grant. I'm set. So it's not ambition that makes me want to do this. It's a combination of being pissed off and cynical. And you hear people saying all the time, why doesn't somebody do something? And I said to myself, dude, you're somebody.
That's right.
Why don't you do something? And, you'll be able to hear from my accent, I immigrated to this country. And every single day, I am grateful to have the opportunity to live in this country. I'm incredibly grateful to have been allowed to come and live in this country. And I see bad things happening in this country. I see this country deteriorating. I see this country, I see a lot of very bad things happening, and somebody has got to stand up and do something about it. And I can tell you the bad things that are happening to this country and the things that are going to affect people's lives are not other people's pronouns.
That's right.
And they're not whatever flag the Prime Minister stands in front of, whether it's an Australian flag or an Aboriginal flag, is going to make no difference to your life. What is going to make a difference to your life is the fact that we have 2 supermarkets which are gouging you every time you go and buy food, and try living without food. We've got 4 banks that are responsible, that are the reason why we've had no real wage increases in the last 15 years. Not my opinion, that's the Productivity Commission's views. These entrenched interests which are buying off our political parties, nobody stands up to them, man.
Yep.
And in the times that I've had the opportunity to go before the Senate, I'm finding it's not really that difficult.
Yes.
Like, all you have to do is take their arguments, turn it into a stick, and beat them. So, you know, that's why I really want to do this.
All right, so watch that.
If you haven't watched it, you have to, this weekend, as soon as possible, watch it and share it widely. We've got to get this
it
guy
out
in
everywhere,
there.
yeah, for sure. Can't waste
And
this
don't,
opportunity.
And seriously, don't look for what you can do and donate. We've got to spread that everywhere.
All right, now, second topic. Australia doesn't like tasting its own medicine. Now, Robbie, we've had and still have this Chinese flotilla, which includes, we know, a frigate, a missile cruiser and replenishment vessel. We don't know a submarine. The Navy officials have said, I don't know, I can't be definitive. So, of course, that's allowed space for the media to wax eloquent about what might be involved here. And, of course, it wasn't even confirmed 100% whether live fire was included in the exercises, but even if it were, that could be just literally high caliber guns firing rounds into targets. But the way
horizontally, not like missiles.
Yeah,
going up
no,
in
but
the
the way the media presents it is as if it's with their sinister tones and everything, as if it's high-powered ballistic missiles that could, you know, MH17 style strike a Qantas jet flying over
you and I heard Michael Shoebridge, formerly of the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, actually the brother of, I mentioned David Shoebridge before, it's actually his brother, the Senator David Shoebridge's brother, but Michael Shoebridge, I don't know how they get on at Christmas time, but this guy while he was at ASPI, was paid by the Americans to hype up a war with China, and he got on the project the other day, and he actually said that there was danger here of an MH17 type the Chinese shooting down an Australian passenger plane. Absolutely lunatic comment. It's not a war zone out there. You know, at worst, MH17 was a bad accident. It's not even confirmed. The Dutch did not confirm who ultimately did it, because they excluded them. It was the Malaysians' plane, and they excluded them from the investigation. But anyway, not to digress there. But this is the kind of fear-mongering that our media has just pushed a button, and it's wall-to-wall, as people would be familiar with.
And there's questions about who was informed of this ahead of time and when. But just to say, one thing that we do know is that both Australia and New Zealand Defence Forces were jointly monitoring the transit that was going on, and it was New Zealand military that was monitoring the exercise ahead of the so-called live firing. Or the exercise itself was when it was to occur. So they were apparently informed, but there was a delay in New Zealand passing that on to us. So you've got those issues that are going
this
on.
This alliance works very well, doesn't it?
And even then, if you look through the timeline of when we were informed, I mean, there were no meetings with the Prime Minister about it until much later that afternoon. So they obviously weren't too concerned about it, because guess what? It was all within international law. This is the sort of thing that goes on all the time. But what the Chinese are doing here, and they don't normally do it though, is responding tit for tat to what we have done countless times when we do such exercises in contested waters of the South China Sea.
Look, it's probably running at a rate of about 100 to 1. So for every 100 times we're up there, completely out of our domain, provoking China, claiming that we're protecting our trade routes, but of course the irony is we're protecting our trade with China, because that's our biggest trading partner, supposedly from China. But what we're actually doing, Elisa, is doing the bidding of the Americans up there. Mm-hmm. And we are doing that all the time. We are permanently there. One of the things we do, which Clinton Fernandez, who's a very cluey academic on all this in Australia, exposed in Crikey a couple of years ago. We're not there just, what we call freedom of navigation is a lot more sinister than that. Our Navy is dropping these devices attached to buoys that are motion detection devices that are designed to detect the differences in water displacement activity, whether it be a sort of like a commercial ship, a fishing boat, a Navy ship, a warship, and a submarine. And the whole purpose of it, and so we're dropping these things all the time, right around China. We're sailing back and forth, dropping this stuff, right up in China's face, right around China. And the whole purpose of that is so that we can detect when China's submarines are trying to leave the shallow waters around China and go out into deep water in the ocean, where they can go down low and just disappear. Because that is China's nuclear deterrent. Now, China has a very small nuclear arsenal compared to the United States and the Russians. When they first developed nuclear weapons back in 1964, it was actually a game changer, because when they developed the weapons, they actually said something quite profound. The Chinese were the first to say, we will never use nuclear weapons first. They were the first to declare a no first use policy. There will only ever be retaliation. Right? And that actually, experts have said, that action by the Chinese in 1964 contributed a lot to the peace that we've had since, where nuclear weapons have never actually been used. But anyway, for the deterrent to work, the possible adversary, i.e. the Americans, will know that if they ever tried to mess with China, there are submarines where they don't know where they are will surface, fire missiles at them, and it will be mutually assured destruction. And so don't even think about it. But what the Americans want to do is, using us, detect when the submarines are leaving, so their submarines can follow them. They sit behind them, ready to strike, so they can knock them out and take away China's deterrent, so they can hit China with nuclear weapons with impunity, which is a very, very dangerous policy. It's actually been one of the equivalent on the Russian side in terms of the Americans positioning weapons in Eastern Europe that are designed to knock out Russia's nuclear missiles, right? That has contributed to the war over there, because it makes the adversary, it's effectively a disarmament policy against them, right? And therefore, the only thing they can do is be prepared to do a first strike. So this is a very, really dangerous thing. That's what we're doing there. We're not just saying, oh, international law says we can sail through these waters. No, that is it's incredibly aggressive what we're doing there. The other part of it, Elisa, is in November last year, one of our ships, the what's it called?
HMAS
Toowoomba, sailed through the Taiwan Strait.
Yep.
Now, quick legal lesson here. If our friend John Lander was here, he would explain this in very clear detail. The Taiwan Strait, between the island of Taiwan and mainland China, is not international waters. China says Taiwan is a part of China. Taiwan says Taiwan is a part of China. They all claim to be China. They just have a dispute over who's the legitimate government. That is not international waters. So there's no freedom of navigation through there. We sail through there to be incredibly provocative.
And we did it in November without informing them.
And they lodged a protest. We didn't even give them notice that we were doing that.
Yeah.
And, they lodged, and it's not like our ships don't carry weapons. Of course, they're fully heavily armed, etc. So what the Chinese have done is, after 100 times of these kind of provocations, every now and then, like this week, they've sent down this flotilla. They've stayed legal. They went through the exclusive economic zone, which is a 200 nautical mile limit. So your territorial waters is 12 nautical miles. The exclusive economic zone is 200 nautical miles, but everyone knows that you're free to travel through those zones. So they pass through there. Most of the time they've stayed outside of that, well outside of that. And they've been conducting these exercises, and they're probably saying right now on their ships, well, Australia, this is what it feels like. And ask yourself, viewers, how are we handling it? Are we cool, calm and collected? Well, there are people in the military. Admiral Chris Barry has come out and said, look, this is so normal, it's not funny. Cool your jets. But you've got these a-hole politicians in Canberra, like Peter Dutton and James Patterson and the Aspie crowd and Michael Shoebridge, etc. They use this to whip up maximum hysteria. Now, we have a plug for our Senate candidate in Northern Territory. If you're in the Northern Territory, vote for Lionel Wiley in the Senate. He's our lead Senate candidate. Lionel's actually a commercial pilot, and he's briefed us on how normal this is to be rerouted around zones where you're told, sort of late notice, you better go around that, right? And that happens all the time. They're not fazed by it. This is a political beat up, but driven by absolute hypocrisy. And then on 7:30 last night, Sarah Ferguson asked James Patterson. She is such a terrible interviewer and so biased, but she finally asked him a legitimate question: isn't our reaction hypocrisy? And James Patterson immediately reduced it from the political reaction to talking. He was talking about the way our Navy behaves compared to the Chinese Navy
in general.
Yeah, and his answer was, sorry to put it crudely, our shit don't stink. We never do anything wrong. We're so perfect. Look at those horrible Chinese. I mean, the guy is an absolute xenophobe, not loyal to this country. He's loyal to the United Kingdom and the United States. Remember, he wanted to be. He's part of this funny group in the United Kingdom that wants to bring back the old dominions and make us part of the United Kingdom again. This is. They hate our region. They hate the fact that we're surrounded by Asian countries. These people, even though that's where our economic interests are. And that's what he said last night on the project.
Yes. So that's the point. Our point is clear. We don't like getting a taste of our own medicine.
So don't do it. So if you don't like, that's the bottom line, Elisa.
Yeah.
So if you're a viewer and saying, "Oh, Robbie's been pro-China again," whatever, okay. But if you don't like it, at least get this: if you don't like it, then tell your government to stop doing it. They're responding to what we do. And what we do is non-stop. It's incessant, right? And they do it every now and then just to give us a taste of our own medicine.
And what makes it worse is, as you've said, we are just doing this on behalf of someone else. It's not even our sovereign decision that we need to do this to defend Australia. It's had literally nothing to do with that.
But because of this climate that these xenophobes have whipped up to draw us into these extreme neocons in America and their fantasy of a war against China, and use us as their proxy, the way they've used Ukraine as their proxy, and look at the way Ukraine's being treated now. America's done with them, so okay, just pull the pin, right? That's exactly what will happen to us. John Mearsheimer said it famously back in 2016 or whatever. He said, America's leading Ukraine down the primrose path, and Ukraine will be wrecked. And that applies exactly to Australia. We've been led down the primrose path to have politicians talking about, it's in our interest to go to war over Taiwan, etc. And if we do that, we will be utterly wrecked.
Yeah.
That hasn't happened yet, but we're warning that it's not even the disasters. The consequences will be disastrous. But even before it happens, we've already got the consequences in what's happening to people like Dan Duggan.
Yeah.
These xenophobes have made it so that our family is being ruined, destroyed by utter bastards in Canberra because they're so sycophantic to the United States. Wake up, Australia.
Yeah, we're whipping up the enemy image for the future war that puts us in the position that Ukraine's currently in. If you want to hear more about the backdrop to that situation, that theatre of the Ukraine war, go and watch on Martin North channel, Digital Finance Analytics. Robbie did a live show with him on Tuesday night, which goes through a lot of that history and background, which is very important to situate that whole picture.
Yeah, we can put a link below. Lisa, before we end, I just want to mention, again, come back to donations. Earlier I talked about Clive Palmer. He didn't approach us. What we just talked about is one of the reasons why. Clive Palmer is a total charlatan on this China thing. He figured out years ago that Australians can be whipped up on this, and he's been one of the yahoos carrying on about it. So, we're not going to get a billionaire, and you don't want a billionaire saving Australia because he's not going to do it anyway, right? You want the Australian people to save Australia, and we're the party of the Australian people, the Australian Citizens Party. But this message, if we can get it out through all Australia, including all those communities that are very receptive, there's lots of people in the Chinese community in Australia who are all Australians and get to vote, and they know this talk of war is lunacy, and they're getting sick of the two major parties. We need to get the message out through them. Hey, if you're sick of those guys, vote for the Citizens Party, right? Other immigrant communities, there's a total, this Gaza thing has has resulted in a total psyop being run on the Australian people on this anti-Semitism question. And there's lots of people who are affected by that. They need to know they should be voting for us. The small business community who, hearing Andy Schmulo and the fight he will take up to the big corporations that are rigging the game against them and screwing them, they need to vote for us. And it's about, the reason we're appealing for money is it's about getting the message out to them. What we do, the way the Citizens Party raises money has to fund an operation that is, we employ close to 30 people nationwide. We have 20 people in our head office. We're doing research, we're putting out publications, we run campaigns, and regulars will be familiar with our campaigns. We run campaigns on issues. And that tends to be able to be financed by the normal way we raise money. But this election campaign is a much bigger thing on top of all that. And it comes down to advertising and promotions, and it all takes money. And that's why if you get that, hit that button and actually give us some support and be part of hopefully thousands of people that do it, and do it regularly to fund that process. And we will make sure that money goes a million miles compared to Clive Palmer's money or whatever, right? Yep. But we can make a big impact on this election if people do that.
And just finally, to see who our candidates are, I think I forgot to plug it last week, but we have a full web page up on the front of our website. You'll see it at the
There's a link
banner
at the top.
So click on that, go to the state. You can see, across Australia, who you can vote for and who you can be promoting amongst people that you want to give a real alternative to. All right, that's the show for this week. Thanks, Robbie. Thanks
Lisa.
for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
Authorised by Robert Barwick, Citizens Party, Melbourne.